All right, let's get into this. Today, Queensland have shut their borders. That has a flow-on effect to whether rugby league is played or not. We'll deal with that a bit later. The New South Wales Premier today said schools are closed. Schools are open, but please don't send your kids. Yep. In Tasmania, they closed the borders last week. So, Richo, I'm going to ask you a question here, which is: have the premiers panicked? Were they being held back too long? What's your judgment here? And I'm talking not about Liberal Labor, I'm talking about the state responsibility versus that national cabinet solidarity that gives people, I think, far more sense of reassurance than the different messages from different states.
Yeah, I'm loath to get stuck into politicians at the moment because when you're in uncharted waters, there's no rule book to follow. You can't turn to page 14 and look it up. So you've really got to make it up as you go. And so I'm not going to be critical of Gladys. Obviously, it wasn't her best day, but at a time of real difficulty, you can understand people having the odd cock up, and I think you can forgive them. So I would do that. That having been said, where do we go from here? What is the next step? I think schools have to close. I can't see how you keep them open. I think that is an absolute inevitability. And so what about all those families where there's no one to look after the kids? What happens?
Yep.
Who gives up work? I mean, this is a mess. I just don't think people have thought through all the consequences of the things that we're talking about.
Well, I'm with you. And this is the thing too, look, I've got a reputation of, bashing and screaming and poking and punching when it comes to politicians. I will do my best not to do that while we're all trying to work out what happens.
Only Labor ones.
But no, hey, Christopher Pyne, I'm sure, would opine that I was a massive supporter of his, let alone the Ghost and the rest. But anyway, but yeah, of course, you're probably right. That's now, Jenna. In Western Australia, they're obviously distance all the rest of it here. The state government is more tangible than the federal government here. And again, it's not about hooking in, it's just about asking this question right now. A couple of nights ago, I showed that there were 15 different briefings about coronavirus that came from federal and state authorities. It's too much information. It's too much information, and it leads to panic people about things being more urgent than what they are. Now, we know we have to flatten the curve. We know we don't want to make older people sick. But you can't simultaneously do that while frightening people.
Yeah, it's been really interesting over here, Paul. We've had Premier Mark McGowan be backed up by the Batman to his Robin being Health Minister Roger Cook. And they've come out together every day and they've given a very thorough briefing about this is how many cases we have. Unfortunately, those cases have been rising at exponential numbers. We've had just 20 new ones today. Unfortunately, we've got 2 people critically ill in hospital, and it's a bit of a worry because we've only got 126 critical beds in Western Australia. So the Premier has come out swinging today, basically saying we will be clearing off Rottnest Island. That will be a quarantine zone for anyone that comes in across the border as of 12 noon tomorrow. And he's urging all of us to sort of pull back from heading out into remote and regional Western Australia to places like the Kimberley, where there are quite a lot of Indigenous populations out there who already have compromised immune systems, so we don't want to spread this bug any further. So Mr McGowan's been very forthright in we're at war. He came out yesterday and said WA is at war, and he's closed the borders. So it's going to be interesting to see how we go as people, because now it's really in our hands, that those of us in the community, to do our bit. The politicians have done enough. We've got to step up to the plate now.
Yeah, I agree completely. We've got quarantine in Rottnest Island. The people who are half of the people here at Sky News, including the former super producer Josh, who says that of all the places to be quarantined, I tell you what, if Queensland does it for Hamilton Island, I'm crossing the border tomorrow.
Same.
I'm crossing the border tomorrow. Rowan, have the premiers panicked, or is it understandable considering some of the pressure that's on them?
I'd kind of take issue with some of the things that have already been said. I was saying nearly 2 weeks ago that we had to really go in hard, fast, forget about all this gently, step-by-step approach, that we really had to go in and learn from Italy. I was saying 2 weeks ago that we had a 2-week window to avoid the Italian mistake. If you listen to the Italians, they've been very clear that once the exponential thing kicks in, it takes off so quickly, so rapidly, that you lose control of it. And the moment you don't have enough ventilators and you don't have enough hospital beds, then you're in real trouble and people die. And Paul, it's not just old people who are dying. There are young people who are now dying in Italy as well. And the reality is that the hospital system has to have enough beds and enough ventilators. That way you can prevent most of the deaths. But that's it. And we don't have either. Places like Singapore and Taiwan have much more beds. They learned from the SARS epidemic, you really have to stock up on your beds and your ventilators. America's lucky, they can immediately start producing ventilators because I think they've asked Ford to do so. They have, unlike us, manufacturers and industries, and they haven't priced their own labour market, sent all the jobs overseas. So we are in real trouble. There's no two ways around it. There's only two approaches. One is go in hard and fast and prevent and kill off this thing as rapidly as possible. Now, I'm not as pessimistic as some who say, I'm not an expert, obviously, but if you look at the success that they appear to have had in Singapore, Taiwan and elsewhere, it would appear that you can get on top of it. There's a little town in Italy called Vo, which is right in the heart of Lombardy, right in the heart of the epicenter of the epidemic. They've managed to curtail and have no further deaths simply by mass testing of the entire population and then isolating. And they've gone really hard, no social contact. They went in really hard, really fast, and it has worked. Doesn't mean it will work here. But the problem which you are absolutely right to point to is the mixed communications, the mixed messaging. Now, there's nothing wrong with having loads of experts and loads of different politicians. That's our system. But we have been clumsy in the messaging, and I would criticise the politicians for it. Yes, I think they're doing a pretty good job, 7 out of 10, whatever. But you've got to get to 10 out of 10, and that comes down to consistent messaging that the public can clearly understand, so that the public, and you're right to point to things like education, you've got to tell the public, you're not going to school today. Work it out. And I'm sorry, that is the only way to beat the virus. It might be politically painful, but that's it.